Hello, and welcome to ScrapTV, the video forum for the ISRI and Scrap Magazine websites. I am Kent Kiser, your ScrapTV host, and today we're very happy to have Adam Minter joining us for a little conversation. Adam is a longtime freelance writer for Scrap Magazine, ISRI's magazine, but also a well-known author of Junkyard Planet, a book released 2 years ago that's become very popular about the scrap recycling industry. He also contributes and writes for numerous other publications, including Bloomberg View, and Recycling International, among others. So we're very happy to have Adam here today. Thank you for joining us, Adam.
Great to be here.
And we're going to be talking about a variety of issues, mostly focused on electronic scrap and trade. But first of all, Adam, for Scrap Magazine, you recently wrote a story on electronic recycling in Africa, with a focus on Kenya and Ghana, and specifically visited the electronics recycling site called Agbogbloshie in Ghana. It has been notoriously called in the past the e-waste dumping ground of the world. Can you comment for us on what you really found there on your visit, and if that proved to be correct or not?
Sure. Well, when I went there, I wasn't quite sure what to expect. I was pretty sure it wasn't the world's largest e-waste dumping ground, but you don't know what you're going to find until you get there. And for me, it was pretty remarkable going into the site. And even before I was there, the site at Agbogbloshie is actually a district, an industrialized district in Accra, the capital of Ghana. And so as you go into that district, you're going past sweet potato markets. There's a Pepsi bottling plant there, and I thought this is a really industrialized area, which actually makes sense if you know scrap. You know, scrap yards tend to have consumers nearby. I didn't know if anybody was consuming anything, but when you finally go into the market, the first thing that hit me was there's a lot of automobile scrap here. You know, and I wasn't seeing what you so often see in pictures from there, which is, you know, people taking apart computers, taking apart monitors, laptops. Right. But I was seeing people dismantling cars, you know, taking out engines, you know, and picking apart these cars down to just the smallest level. Now, I can say they certainly weren't doing it to the standards we would expect, you know, in a developed country. You know, there's all kinds of dangers. There wasn't much fluid containment, but there wasn't the e-waste. You weren't seeing the e-waste. Now, as I walked through, you did come across a few places where you do have, you know, there'd be somebody with a stack of, you know, a couple dozen computers, and they're taking them apart, dismantling, and putting the circuit boards in one place, the hard drives in another. But it was by no means the majority of the value or the weight being generated there. In terms of the e-waste, what I thought was very interesting was that the circuit boards were being set aside into a container where they'd eventually be sent out to Nigeria and then up to Belgium, probably to Umicore, which is a plant that's much more effective than somebody with a cook stove and getting the gold and the various precious elements out.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, now, after that article came out, there were other groups that started saying that your article was engaging in what they call waste trade denial. I mean, what do you have to say about something like that when you were just there on the ground a couple months ago?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't deny anything. I mean, certainly there was e-scrap there, you know. You weren't seeing people cooking circuit boards, but you did see people, you know, burning wire. It's happening there. So I didn't deny anything. But what I tried to tell is tell the fuller story, which is most of what is going on there is related to the automobile trade. You also see some industrial scrap there. It's basically an old-style scrapyard to a certain extent, like you'd see in the U.S. maybe in the 1950s, minus the electronics. You know, so to me it was just a fuller picture, and you know, and for me it was a very interesting place. You know, it's as if the U.S. scrapyards way out in the countryside never progressed past 1950, and suddenly we're getting, you know, a small stream of electronics in.
Very interesting. Yeah. Well, now, over the years, there have been numerous studies done about the whole international trade of electronic scrap, and as they call it, e-waste. Then there's a lot of potential issues with those studies about the data and whatnot. People pick them apart, but what kind of trends or in general themes have you seen in those reports?
Well, sure. I mean, you know, every one of those reports is flawed in some way. There's no question about it. You know, just as reports on climate change are flawed, and we're constantly updating that data. Because people are interested in the phenomenon and trying to get closer and closer to what's there. And if you take those reports each and every one of those reports together, you're seeing a very interesting trend, which is that most of the stuff that's being generated in the West, I'm not talking about the US, but it could include Japan and Europe in that, is staying in the generating countries. Maybe it's not being recycled correctly in those countries, though increasing amounts are, but very, very little is actually being exported out. The most recent study we have out of Europe, the CWIT study, shows export of non-working electronics at only 4.2%, which is far below what the general perception of this trade is. And so collectively, each of these studies, and some are better than others, but they're all kind of pointing in that direction. You're not seeing these studies that are suggesting even 30% export out of the developed world. It's all in the the very low double digits, 10 to 15%, or much lower.
Sure. Well, now I know other organizations have thrown out figures as high as 30 to 50% or something like that of material being exported. What clarity do you have on any of those kind of figures?
Well, I mean, those figures are all generally based upon anecdote and interviewing people within the trade, and that's that's valid. That's certainly valid. You can go and ask people. I do that too in my reporting. How much is being exported out? But that's not enough. You need actual trade data, and there are ways to get at the data. There's some very clever studies being done at Memorial University in Canada, where they're taking data on waste trade in batteries, lithium-ion and other power accumulators, and seeing where it's going. And that kind of data is showing a far more complicated picture. That not as much is being exported out from the developed world as people think, but more importantly, it's showing that the trade between developing countries, not OECD countries, is growing a lot. So, I mean, you still need to have that trade data. You still need to have the surveys. Anecdote enough is not enough.
Sure, absolutely. Okay. Now, you just brought up a very important point about how trade has changed over the, say, last decade even, and the whole distinction between OECD, non-OECD, developed and developing nations is changing a lot. Can you comment on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, as Asia's and Africa's middle class starts to rise up, but especially Asia's middle class, they're generating their own streams of scrap, not just e-scrap.
Right.
I mean, scrap paper. I mean, China now, it's an amazing phenomenon. China's now generating the majority of its scrap paper that goes into its mills. And 10 years ago, that was almost unthinkable. But you have enough consumers who are buying stuff in boxes, reading newspapers, and of course that's declining. Yeah. Where you have the phenomenon. And likewise with electronics. China is the world's largest smartphone consumer, dumb phone consumer, laptop consumer, desktop consumer. All of these electronic products are being, consumed in China at rates that, dwarf what's happening in the West. And that material is going to flow, just as it flowed, when developed countries, and still flowing, both in and without. In China, for example, it's flowing into India, it's flowing into Southeast Asia, it's flowing into Africa, both as reusable and as scrap.
Sure. Okay. Now, you see a lot around the world in your travels, in e-scrap and other types of scrap. I mean, are there any trends or just developments you see as the next step in any of these markets? I mean, where do you see scrap going given its current situation?
Well, it's hard to say, but I think there's two very interesting phenomena. One, the developing countries are going to have an economic incentive to start recycling, in a more automated way, in a more technologically sophisticated way, so that they can actually extract more of the value from these devices. I mean, just an Intel CPU. It's very easy, using some chemicals in your basement to get the gold out. But if you want to get the other elements out, you need something much more sophisticated. So I think you're going to start seeing far more sophisticated and bigger investments in processing technology for e-scrap in the developing world, and that's starting to happen in China. I think the more interesting question, well, they're both interesting questions, but the big question is, e-scrap, like all scrap, is sort of going through the life-saving phenomenon.
Oh, right.
So, I mean, my iPad has more processing power in it than my desktop from 10 years ago. Sure. But my desktop compared to my iPad, what's the weight difference? I can hold 20 iPads in my arm, try and hold 20 PCs. What I think the challenge for the industry is going to be is to figure out a way to make recycling those iPads worth it. Because there's a real replacement going on, and it's not just in size. I mean, because of the commodities boom, a lot of these electronics manufacturers got really worried in the late 2000s that we need to start finding replacements for the copper, the gold. So actually, the irony of that is it makes that stuff even less attractive for recyclers. So, I think the thing that's going to be very hard is for recyclers to figure out a way to justify recycling these lightweighted devices. That's going to be tricky, and I think we're still a little ways off from that, but that's going to be the big challenge.
Whoa. Another point that I've heard you talk about is the rising labor rates in China and other nations, and how that's skewing, again, where business is conducted, where material is flowing. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's not just on e-scrap. I mean, the rising labor costs in China in particular having a profound impact on the global recycling industry. And it's doing a couple things. One, it's forcing more automation in China. So suddenly you're seeing eddy currents and just levels of machinery that were never there. That has a side effect, a knock-on effect, which is that it raises the cost of processing. Even though they're trying to bring down the cost, and an eddy can replace a lot of people, it still makes things more expensive. And that means that China in particular will become a less attractive market, or a less profitable market, maybe it's a more accurate way, for exporters all over the world, and we're already seeing that. The other interesting side effect of that is that a lot of scrap businesses in China are starting to look elsewhere to relocate. And so the supply chain is getting longer. So we know a lot of folks are moving down to Vietnam because the labor rates are cheaper. You don't need to buy an eddy current there yet. But the funny thing is, the ultimate end market for a lot of that scrap that will be sorted down that might be in China. So again, it adds up to the same thing, is that the cost of processing in Asia are going up. That means it becomes less profitable for everyone. So how this affects the global supply chain, don't know. But that impact of those labor rate hikes is going to be very profound.
Interesting. Well, listen, thank you for talking to us today. This is Kent Kiser for ScrapTV, signing off and saying hopefully you join us for the next interview coming up.